All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling a seriously huge topic, one that has pretty much shaped the entire modern world: nationalism. I mean, this is a force that can build up a country from scratch and, at the same time, completely shatter an empire. It can create this incredible sense of unity, but it can also be used to exclude people. So let's unpack how this powerful idea really works. You know, just think about it for a second. We see the symbols of a nation everywhere: the flags, the anthems, the stories we tell ourselves. But where does all that stuff actually come from? Are nations just this natural, ancient thing that has always been a part of who we are? Or are they something that has to be actively built? That's really the big question we're going to dig into today. How do you literally build a nation? So, before we can even get into the wild stories of how nations are built, we kind of have to agree on what a nation even is. And believe me, the answer is not as simple as you'd think. To really get it, we need to rewind back to 19th century Europe, because that's where two totally different ideas about what makes a nation really started to take shape. Okay, so on one side, you've got what's called political nationalism. The easiest way to think about this is like a social contract. A nation is basically a community of citizens who all say, yep, we agree to live by these same laws and these same ideals. But then on the other side, you have cultural nationalism. And this idea argues that a nation's something much, much deeper. It's a community that's tied together by a shared language, a shared history, a shared culture. It's not just about laws, it's about blood and soul. And these two ideas, they come from completely different places. The classic example of political nationalism, that's post-revolution France. The big question there wasn't, where are your ancestors from? It was, are you committed to our ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity? If the answer was yes, boom, you are a French citizen. But over in the German-speaking lands, which were being occupied by Napoleon's France, a totally different feeling started to grow. To push back against the French, thinkers started emphasizing everything that made them culturally different: their shared German language, their unique folk tales, their history. Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like in the real world? How do you take these abstract ideas and forge a nation? Well, for that, we're going to look at the incredible story of Norway in the 19th century. Because in just a few decades, Norway went from basically being a province of Denmark to a fully independent country with a brand new, shiny national identity. And to really wrap our heads around this transformation, you gotta look at three key moments. It all kicks off in 1814 when Norway gets its very own constitution. A huge deal. Then, in the 1840s, this cultural explosion happens called National Romanticism. And all of that hard work finally pays off in 1905, when Norway gets its full independence from Sweden. So, the first move was political. The Constitution of 1814 was a game changer. It created this shared sense of citizenship. All of a sudden, people had a parliament, the Stortinget, a brand new flag to rally around, and a national day, May 17th, to celebrate this new political community they were all a part of. This was political nationalism in action. But here's the thing, political symbols just weren't enough. So starting around the 1840s, this educated elite in the cities launched a massive cultural project. They literally traveled out into the countryside to collect what they called cultural raw material. So old folk tales, songs, different dialects. You had guys like Asbjornsen and Moe gathering fairy tales, Ivar Aasen creating a whole new written language from rural dialects. And suddenly, the history of the Vikings was dusted off and turned into this shared, heroic past for everyone. And here's a perfect example of how this worked: the Hardanger fiddle. This was an instrument from just one specific part of Norway, but the national elite picked it up, they promoted it in art and music, and they declared it the national instrument for all Norwegians. I mean, think about that. If you were a farmer in the east or a fisherman way up north who'd never even laid eyes on one, you were now being told that this fiddle was a part of your heritage. You can literally see how a national culture was being carefully built piece by piece. So, a powerful, unified Norwegian identity was created. It's a great story, right? But this brings us to a really, really critical question. When you build a community, when you draw a line and define who belongs, what about the people who get left on the other side of that line? What's the price of all this unity? This quote right here, it's from a government directive about schools in 1898, and it just lays bare the dark side of this entire project. To create one single unified Norwegian nation, other cultures inside the country's borders, like the indigenous Sami and the Crane people, they were suddenly seen as a problem. Their languages had to be stamped out. This policy actually had a name, fornorsking, which means Norwegianization. And this was no accident. This was a deliberate, state-sponsored campaign to assimilate these minority groups, to systematically erase their unique cultures and languages and replace them with one single, state-approved Norwegian culture. And the way they did it was brutal and systematic. In schools, Sami and Kven kids were often flat-out forbidden from speaking their own language, even to each other. Many were shipped off to state-run boarding schools, totally cut off from their families and their culture. There were even new laws that made it easier for Norwegian speakers to buy land, and historians started promoting theories that basically said the Sami didn't really have a historical claim to their own lands. But this process did not go unchallenged. People fought back. Isak Saba, who was the very first Sami person elected to the Norwegian parliament, he made this incredibly powerful point. He said, look, he was all for Sami people learning Norwegian so they could get ahead in life, but if Norwegianization meant they had to give up who they were, give up their own identity, their own nationhood, then he was absolutely 100% against it. So this whole story of Norway, both the inspiring creation and the devastating cost, it perfectly captures the two-sided nature of nationalism. It's an ideology with two completely different faces. It's a force that can build you up, but it can also tear you down. On the one hand, nationalism is like this powerful glue. It's the force that brought a bunch of spotted states together to create countries like Germany and Italy. But at the exact same time, nationalism is also a hammer. It's the force that smashed apart massive multi-ethnic empires like the Ottoman and the Austro-Hungarian empires as all these different groups started demanding their own nations. And that right there is the core idea I want you to take away from all of this. Nationalism is a paradox. It can create this incredible sense of a shared home, a feeling of belonging for millions of people. But the very same walls that you build to define who's inside that home, those walls can become a prison for everybody else. So I want to leave you with this final thought. The next time you see a flag waving, or you hear a national anthem, or you tell one of those national stories, just take a second to think about what we've talked about. When we celebrate our nation and the unity it creates, who might we be forgetting in the process? Who's been left outside those walls?